Hi, everybody. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
We're going to start the program now. So if everyone could mute themselves, that would be fantastic. Okay.
We had a fun time.
Excuse me. We're going to start the program. Please mute yourself. Welcome to everyone.
It's going to be crazy. Take too long.
Please. We're starting the program.
100 people there.
It's very nice to see so many people from all around the country today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Deanna Migdal, the Executive Director of Not Mott USA. And to everyone, thank you for joining us. Not Mott's mission is to enrich and improve the lives of women, children, and families in Israel. As a Zionist organization and part of an international women's movement, we are strong advocates for social justice, gender equality, and access to education for all. If you'd like to learn more about us and the important work we do to empower women and to help break the cycle of violence in the family, please check us out at naamat.org. Today, we are fortunate to be able to take the next hour to learn about another subject that is near and dear to all of our hearts, Mahjong. Personally, I just started playing last year, right before the pandemic started. I continue to play each week online with some of my friends who are actually here with us today. Hopefully, we can all start playing in person soon. But how much do we really know about the game and the history? Let's find out. It is my pleasure to introduce Yvonne Wolf. Yvonne was born in Taiwan and educated in the United States and Europe. She has extensive experience living and working internationally in Denmark and Japan in human resources and is a global language trainer. She was fluent in English, Mandarin, and Danish, and has studied Japanese, Spanish, and Greek. Between work and personal travel, she has visited more than 20 countries and 25 states within the United States. After settling with her family in the Chicago area, she formed a company called Chinese Intercultural LLC to help American business leaders to develop and strengthen their ability to communicate confidently and effectively with Chinese business people. I now hand the floor over to Yvonne to educate us on one of our favorite pastimes, Mahjong. She'll give her presentation and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, here is Yvonne Wolf.
Thank you, Deanna. It's wonderful to be with such a warm and enthusiastic crowd. I'm glad to hear all that enjoyment that comes from just saying the word Maj, and people just get so excited. So and I see that we're across several time zones, and I'm glad to see you here choosing to join us. Now, today, I'm not going to talk about how to play the game. It's more about a cultural history of the game. So I will just like to leave all the questions to the end. If you have a question during my presentation, you are welcome to put it in the chat and we'll make sure that it's addressed before the end of the presentation. Now I will share my screen so that we can get started. Now I started with this topic because I found out that there are lots of articles online about Mahjong. One of the top articles is whether Mahjong is a Jewish game. So I thought that was a good question to start with, to answer. So I think Mahjong is a game that's enjoyed by East and West. And I want to show you some of these funny memorabilia or paraphernalia that maybe you have that shows us how much people enjoy this game. So the plate on the left is from a Chinese restaurant. The center is a piece of jewelry that a friend of mine makes. Carol Berry creates these unique pieces using Mahjong tiles. Now I'm wearing one right now. I can show you if you can see that. And then the third one is, this is a Jello dessert that has all the Mahjong pieces. So it's edible. It's entirely edible, and is part of the fun that we associate with Mahjong. Then this slide, it shows the game is enjoyed by North and South, and you might have seen license plates references to Mahjong. And again, necklace. This is from my friend who makes this, and it's very fun to see what she does with these pieces and a bracelet. And then and the right, you see that Mahjong is my therapy. And I think that speaks to so many of us, not just Chinese or Jewish people. So with that beginning of how much we can tell that people love and enjoy this, and let's learn a little bit about this game. So first, it's a game that I learned from my research that is enjoyed very much by the American Jewish community. Now, what is that relationship, and how does it become somehow associated with Jewish community centers? So we will talk more about that, about the path which Mahjong has taken to come to this country. These are some other questions that I will be answering, so that will give us all a little more background and a little more context of what the game does and why it is set up such ways. I think it'll also give us just more enjoyment when we handle these little pieces again with our friends. Now, I see that lots of people enjoy Mahjong just as well in the social environment, like I heard right before the programming. That is its role in the Chinese version as well. When I'm with Chinese people or East Asian people and we're we're at a party, that's the kind of chatter that comes around at the Mahjong table. It's a very happy and easy place to socialize. So it's not like somewhere you have to be quiet, like a chess table, right? Sometimes you see people play chess and they don't like people talking. Well, that's not the ambiance where Mahjong is enjoyed. So what does Mahjong mean? Now, when did it start? Well, I don't have a definitive answer because, well, I'll explain you why, because there's just so many answers. And what do the bands, cracks, and dots mean? How did it arrive to the United States? Who played it? And who plays it now? So these are the questions I will address today. And again, this is just a preliminary understanding of Mahjong. It's not meant to be the end all for your interests and conversations. I hope that it will begin many, many more conversations you have about Mahjong. So first, about Mahjong, what is it? Okay, it has 144 pieces. Well, probably more in the American version. Now, there's usually 4 sets of 3 suits, and that includes the BAMs, the cracks, dots, and wins. The names are in English, I learned. So now before I go on, I want to tell you that most of what I'm sharing with you is not just from the research I've done in English, but more so the research I've done in Chinese. So as many times this information I share with you is very, let's say, unheard of or untold, and that's why it's called an untold story. Many times the research is done from American perspective, American researchers, and they're not reading the Chinese research material. So I think that you will find it interesting to see what Chinese think of this game. So the four sets are of the 3 suits, and they started with actually only 108 pieces. Now, 108 pieces, you say, why 108? Well, legendarily, it was supposed to represent the 108 heroes of the water margin, which is a widely popular Chinese fiction, but it had an oral tradition that was very popular before it was written down in something like the 14th century. So we kind of think that it came after or maybe before that time. So it's very hard to know exactly. So I will share with you first of what the name means. So Mahjong, here I have it spelled Ma Chue, which is the Q-U-E. It's not Ma K. It doesn't sound like that because the Q here is in the pinyin form. Now, pinyin is the current phonetic system that China uses for its Mandarin language. There has been many other systems of transcribing Chinese sounds into English, and they have there. Maybe you have heard of Wei Giles, you might have heard of Yale's system, but those systems are not very consistent. So Ma Che with the Q having a CH sound is the current phonetic system that is the most uniform and has been much more widely used in the last 20 years. It started being used in 1957 when China tried to simplify its language and create a phonetic system, not for foreigners to learn Chinese, but for Chinese people to learn Chinese. So Ma Che, that Q actually have a CH sound. It means sparrows. So Ma Che, you see the same characters, if you can see that, and I have I circled it in a box that I've been so very fortunate to have seen, and then you see how those characters repeat, and Ma Che actually means sparrow. So the game you're playing that now is called Mahjong, and we'll talk about why it's called Mahjong, but it came from sparrows. Now, why would it has anything to do with sparrows? Now, some people have theories about how, well, when the pieces are clicking and clacking together when you are shuffling them, it sounds like a bunch of sparrows, and that's why. Well, that sounds like a good theory. However, based on research, this game started before it took a tile form. Then it wouldn't really make sense, would it? You see, the game existed before it came in a tile form, so it didn't make any noise. So that's why there is another answer to why is it called Ma Che or Mahjong. And again, now this is a presentation for anything to do with Chinese culture is likely to have more than one answer. So it actually has a background in the granary. So they think that this game was played in a granary because of the motifs and what they represent. Now, granary, many times, if I don't have a picture here, people might think of the right kind, the kind that we see silos in Wisconsin and Midwest. It's very common to see huge barns and cylindrical granaries in the Midwest. But the left is what the Chinese ones look like. So I want you to have an idea what they look like. And also I like you to have an idea how it's very old and is how people kept grains for storage. And the power structure in this granary is unlike if we think about Midwest and we think of our silos and huge granaries here. It is for the people. It may be owned by a farmer or owned by a co-op or a group. But in Chinese, traditionally, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, it's military owned, it's military controlled. And there is a general who is the nobleman. You see the little character on a horse? So that is the person in charge. The granary has always, and food, and the let's say the control of food has always been part of government and military. So it's very different from American background that the granary, the food would be for the people. Well, in the Chinese sense, the granary would be keeping the food for the soldiers so that they can protect the borders and therefore protect the people. And if there should be a shortage of food, the granary, the military force, would be the ones who release them to the people. So it's a position of power in which there's a hierarchy of subordinates, and it's certainly not someplace that people just go and pick up their food from. Now, since we come to the name of the game, now the name of the game, now we have this Ma Che that I told you about, where Ma Che is the sparrow. Now, in the granary, the Ma Che, the sparrow, is not a friendly position. Actually, the sparrows are considered a pest of a granary. Now, and then the name of the game that now we have this Mahjong. Well, Mahjong, the characters actually indicate that it's some kind of general. So the characters tell us a meaning, and it sounds like it could be that his last name was Ma, as in Mao Zedong, the last name goes first. So in Chinese, the last name goes first before the before his rank or honorific. So it would start with Ma as his last name, and Jiang means general, or it could mean that that character is flax. So again, having to do with granary and storage of crops and some kind of grains. So we have to and have this background. I know it sounds odd, but I just want you to shift your thoughts on what Mahjong means for us, but where it might come from, and then we can make more sense out of these symbolism. So, for example, when we talk about that sparrow, the sparrow is not something desirable. Not, and sure enough, in winter, I have a bird feeder outside too, and we love to see the sparrows come in. They come in like clockwork. They have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's hilarious. The sparrows have a time, and then they also have a hierarchy who eats first. So by watching outside my window, I enjoy seeing birds and feeding birds. Now, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that's not the relationship we have with sparrows. It was before the industrialization of food. That many sparrows is really competing with human survival. So the game being called Ma or sparrows is actually a way of dealing with something negative, that, oh, those darn pests, they're like rats, okay, those darn pests, and then we make a game out of it, and we shift our emotions into something that is pleasant and joyful. So that is very typical of Chinese culture, to break the negativity of a sign, let's say sparrows, and then flip it with something that brings some kind of happiness or jest or some kind of joke to cancel out, to counter that negativity. So we have Ma and Mahjong as the name of the game. So we just started with that, and I highlight the part we're in just so that you have some idea where I've stopped the last section, and now we talk about a little bit about how or when did it start? How old can this game be? If you look online, there's so many answers, and there are some answers that says, oh, it was mid 18th century, so 1840, something like that. And then you also find answers that says, oh, it's 1,000 years old. Well, I doubt it's 1,000 years old. Mahjong, as a game, it doesn't seem to be that old because, well, think about the game Go, that white and black pebbles that you play as a strategic game. That I can believe is very old. Okay, because it probably started with black and white pebbles, really. But then Mahjong, well, anyway, there's indications that it couldn't be that old. And then about the other extreme, that it only started in 1840s, I don't think is that young either. Now, the reason that many times people trace back to the mid 1800s is because that is actually when the Western contact with Shanghai, with Hong Kong, with big port cities, part of the whole 19th century, the colonial relationship that brought so many things over to the United States. But I don't think it could be that young either. The reason being that time China was ruled by a Manchurian group of people, so they're not really what we call ethnic Chinese. And the game, being Chinese, was a game that the imperial family adopted and enjoyed. So it must have come before they came to rule, which is at least 300 years. So having posed some of these questions about when it starts, I can tell you from what I read. Now, Chinese sources do want to refer to it something like with about 700 years. Now I have the left. You can see this is American version, which have the jokers, and then it has, well, yes, they have the jokers, and these are the suits. Now that to the right, I want to show you this modern version, but there is a modern version that is played in card form. The reason I would say this game is probably within this 700-year mark is because the game existed before in a card format. Before it became tiles that you see, that there was the mid 1800s date is actually the date when the imperial family changed the format from paper cards to this in the tile form. And the tile, of course, makes it more special, makes it more interesting. But this format was a distinctive time when they actually changed the format. The card format, as you see on the right, is this a modern version. This is very possible because there are other articles about varying forms of poker cards, playing cards. And that it has been noted as a product that has been traded and exported, let's say imported, exported through the Silk Road. And during something like the 12th, 13th, 14th century, there was the technology, so to speak, in East Asia, where block printing makes it possible for sets and sets of cards to be made. So I would give you the range and maybe the estimate of we think that this game is probably around 700 years old. And which 700, which you might think, oh, that's a long time. You can hardly think about what was 700 in France or in Germany. 700 for Chinese dates is not a long time because the last two dynasties is about 500 years. So within just a few dynasties, we would think 700 is actually a more realistic or a conservative guess of how old this game started with. So then we'll talk about what these bams, cracks, and dots mean. Are they really dots? And what is it called bams in English? It sounds pretty exciting, like a onomatopoeia, something loud, right? So bam represents bamboos, but it starts with a bird, right? So why does the bird start and then the bamboos and then it stops, right? It seems so inconsistent. It starts with a bird and then you got bamboo, 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 bamboo. So what is the relationship, right? Could it be? So we will look at some of these. So here are some more of my friends' work. I find it very appropriate because it just shows how much we love this game and is so facetious and bringing in the fun of it. So first I'm going to show you the bird. And you have seen birds in many different formats. Sometimes a bird is a peacock. So this bird, of course, initially they think it was just a sparrow. And is it a bird? You see, so I show you some of these birds, and sometimes this looks like a parrot. Sometimes the bird's been changed for artistic purposes and also aesthetic purposes, and also by what region of China is playing this game. Northern birds and southern birds are different. So one bird is the first tile, but then you have two bams and three bams. So just think, back then, if you're in the context of the granary, the birds, again, were pests. We don't want them around. And before the industrialization of food, going hungry, famine is a very serious and real concern. If you also think about how many more wildlife there was before. The world has never had this many people. So you can imagine back then, 1,000 years ago, less than 1,000 years ago, people were very much in competition with birds when it comes to food and grain and trying to feed their children. Oh yes, I forgot about birth control. Yeah, so you can imagine if you have 10 kids who are hungry and they're birds who are eating your crop, what will you do? Well, you shoot them down. So there was a system, so they say, in the granary, and the granary involves a very tedious type of work. You have to bring the grains there, and then you have to dry it. You have to air it, and then put it back so that it won't get moldy. It won't ferment because you want to eat it, right? And then you don't want to attract all these cockroaches and rats, whatever little critters that may want to attack this storage, so you can eat it when you run out. So this idea of one is a bird, but two is actually represents strings of birds. So the two bams is two bamboo strings of birds, and then for three string of birds you have the third tile, and that's the three bams. So if you worked in the granary, the idea is that as a soldier you may be assigned on pest control. So like we have for a scarecrow now, but pest control means shooting down maybe hundreds of sparrows that come like locusts on your field. So they will shoot them down, and then if they can string them on a bamboo, on a stick, or on some kind of so to string them together, then they can exchange the birds for reward money. Now, Chinese money used to have holes in them. So these holes, they were also given or spent in strings. So strings of money means 10 coins in a loop. So I'll show you here. Oops, sorry. That's the next one. But so what is that like? Now, some people might feel like, oh my gosh, how could you kill those cute little sparrows? And I wouldn't think of them to do that now. But just think, not long ago, we didn't like crows very much. I mean, there are cartoons and there's movies and about how crows, you're just trying to get rid of them, right? You shoot them down, you do something to control the crow population. So just think, it's like that. And so when you turn in your birds, then you get rewarded. So this is an example of the Chinese coins with the holes in there, and they're strung together in tens, and then you would get 5 bams and you get 5 string of money. It's not a lot of money in the back then, but then again, in the 19th century, not so long ago, you know that life in America is also 5 cents for a pound of apples or something crazy like that, right? I've seen some menus from 1950s, 1940s, where a cup of coffee is 12 cents. Well, something like that is just how you have to think of this. People didn't have a lot of money, and the reward money didn't go into the 10,000 and 100,000 markers. It was probably rather small. But small money doesn't sound exciting, right? Nobody care about pocket change, but people like to hear a lot of money. That makes us all happy. So then it comes to the cracks. So number in Chinese, okay, so you see they call characters or cracks, right? In Chinese we call it the the ones, okay, and they're like a W. It sounds like WON. And they are 1, 2, 3, right, 4, and so on. So each one is 10,000. Now that is a counter of how high the number goes. Now we have in Chinese ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, and then well, the fifth one is 1. So 1 is the 10,000 marker. So in the past, to count to 10,000 was the highest you can go. I mean, think about our lives. I remember when the word trillion was introduced to our newspaper vocabulary. Before computers, we really didn't need a number that high. Like for example, to be someone who's rich, we call them a millionaire. Now a millionaire, what's that? We want to go into a billionaire. So these terms of number system also shows you something of what we need numbers to do for us. In the computer age, we need astronomical numbers, but in the past, we didn't need that much. So 10,000 was a lot of number. It was already humongously impossible. So that 10,000 sounds very exciting. Let me relate this to an English analogy. If somebody is really rich, you say, "Oh, he's a million. He's rich or she's rich." That doesn't seem to give us any excitement. But if we say he's a millionaire or she's a millionaire, doesn't that feel just a little more glitter and pizzazz to that? So that's the same idea of the 1. So the first crack is the tens, 10,000. The second tile is 20,000, 30,000, and so on. Now, the people who were taking down the sparrows and getting their monetary rewards, they were not getting 10,000 whatever money, 10,000 yuan for the birds. But it's nice to think about that number, you see? So in Chinese, this number is very exciting, it's very fun to say, and that's why you see them on the game. And then, is it really a dot? Now, we've seen the dots like this, right? But I like to suggest that it is a cylinder on the side. If you ever have, now everybody's stockpiling paper towels and toilet paper at home, right? So if you put your rolls of toilet paper or paper towel on the side, they are cylinders. So this is the idea that the dots are not really dots. The dots are actually cylindrical TNT explosives. Now you're going to think, what does explosives have to do with anything? Well, Chinese invented gunpowder. It never became guns in the Chinese world, but Chinese did use it to create fireworks, but also to scare off critters. Like if you think about birds and rats and cockroaches, you name it, those little critters don't like noise. They don't like fire either. So, and if you burn down your whole field, that's not really good. But if they shot out fireworks or rockets intermittently in a nest of these little animals, it could deter them from coming back. So this idea that there was cylinders and they're stockpiling them, that is the idea where we got the dots from. So these are actually tools for keeping the granary running at an efficient rate. Now this cylinder, these dots or these rockets or explosives, you can't use them without thinking, right? You have to plan. You can't just start firing them wherever you see fit. Whenever you use explosives, I think of here, maybe 4th of July, you have to check the wind. You have to check where you're aiming it. You have to check, are you on the correct side of this dangerous equipment? So that's where we're going to get to our next one, which is the winds. So then maybe you remember that when you take 3 of a kind, have you ever used that term pong for the let's see. See, this is the example. Peng, when you have three of the same, and it's in Chinese. The Chinese sources I read said that that's where it comes from. It's a firecracker sound that goes boom. So in Chinese, instead of boom or pow, we think it was peng. And so this peng, it actually has that, came from this tradition that even Chinese people don't know about. So what I'm sharing with you, it's fun and trivia, but that many Chinese people, they don't know that this has anything to do with a granary. So I just like you to enjoy some of these sounds, these onomatopoeia sounds. So that brings us to the winds, because you cannot aim explosives without thinking of the direction of the winds. So the winds, we have the east, west, north, and south. I like to introduce that, but we probably should start with the flowers, just because since this presentation, my audience is English speaking, we go alphabetically. So flowers is, flowers, you see here, we have some flowers already on the top left corner, and depending on your set, the flowers could be very unique. They're very pretty. The flower set here we see is on the top, the red characters, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And then the green characters below, you actually see plum, iris, bamboo, and chrysanthemum. So these are flowers that actually represent the seasons. And the four flowers, the plum, iris, bamboo, and chrysanthemum, represent the outstanding flower from each season. So they're connected to the season. They're not just random four flowers. And I just want to show you here also that you might see this green and then the red that you might not be familiar with, but you do have the red and green dragons. So that's the Chinese characters for where the green and the red dragons come from. Now, there are many, so the green and the red, now it doesn't mean anything to you, the characters, but but just let you know that why is this related to the explosives. The green, it actually means fire. We still use that in modern English, in modern Chinese, especially in the computer age, when we send a an email, send a text, is we still use the same character, or called fa. Fa is for firing off or sending something. And then the red character, it's zhong or zhong, which means that it's it means hit, or hit to the mark, like in the right, in the center, to hit to the target. And here the white one, they're just blanks. And sometimes I've seen in American version, they call this soaps. And in Chinese, we call them blanks, or we call them the blank box. And that soap, which you don't see here with the etching, because this set doesn't have the square borders. But the soaps were actually the target, a square target, where they would hit and fire your explosives. So let's talk about these flowers. Now these flowers, as I say, the plum blossom represents a winter bloom. Iris is the spring. Bamboo represents the summer. And the fall is represented by the chrysanthemum. These four flowers are unique to a Confucius tradition. Confucius is a hugely influential figure, and his philosophy has really determined the way many Chinese and East Asian people behave. His teachings has been part of the foundation for the legal system and marriage laws, education system, and social interaction in most of East Asia. So hundreds of millions of people know him, and if they didn't know him, they they live by his rules, whether they are every day aware of it or just part of their lives. So these four are also considered Confucius gentlemen because they represent a role model, an outstanding model, outstanding role model for each season. So you notice that none of these flowers are particularly beautiful or fragrant because Confucius believed and taught in his philosophy to lead by example and to be as authentic, honest, and bloom as real as you can. But every season, there's one that's outstanding, one that it leads the rest of the season. For example, the plum blossom in the winter in East Asia, there's nothing blooms except the plum blossom. The iris is the first in spring to bloom. And the bamboo, even though it's not the only one in the summer, it is extremely resilient. It grows extremely fast, right? Anyone who has bamboo in the backyard, try to control the growth because it can just take off beyond your dreams. But bamboo has so many meanings because in Chinese world, it's edible. It can build strong foundation for anything. It takes a lot of weight. Bamboo is resilient, so it has a wonderful meaning here. And then lastly, the chrysanthemum is the only flower that's left when the temperature drops. So that makes them each the leader and the outstanding example in each season. So on the Mahjong table, though, what does it do? So on the Mahjong table, these four gentlemen, and I say gentleman and gentlewoman because this has become in modern times more of a unisex term, and that on the Mahjong table, these flowers represent the importance of good sportsmanship. That means when you win on a third streak, you don't rub it into your faces of your partners or your three other friends, right? And if you lose on the third game, you don't wipe the table clean of the tiles, right? So we don't do that. And the flowers serve as a reminder to always remember good sportsmanship. That whether you win or lose, we're just glad that we're playing. So this is something that is kind of a hidden message, and most people who Chinese are playing, they may not recall consciously, but they do know that just seeing a beautiful tile sometimes it changes your mood. And then the winds. Okay, so the flowers are also represented by the four seasons. So here, the left, I have the English, and sometimes the flowers are the same ones, sometimes they're not. So to the right, you see how the four characters there are just the Chinese version of the English that you see on the left. So that's spring. So the spring flower, I'm not sure what that one is, but I can tell you that the summer one is often represented by a lotus, and then the fall is represented again by a chrysanthemum, and then winter, I think that it looks almost like an iris. So these flowers are again here to reinforce that there's a flower for each season. Now, they also reminds us that the winds change as the seasons change. I didn't notice this when I lived in LA, but now I've been in Illinois for 10 years. I definitely feel it when between one season to the next, the winds pick up around Lake Michigan. So that is the idea that nature, time, changes the wind. In Chinese, wind is not just wind that's on your face or wind as in weather, but wind has very close relationship with a winning streak. So if you think about luck, someone's luck runs out. Well, in Chinese, it has to do with the winds. The winds of luck change for you. To think of the seasons and that nature in the course of a regular year, the climate would change and the seasons change and the winds change. That is a reminder too that you should respect the seasons change. So if you were on this winning streak and you start losing, well, you ought to respect that winds change. It can leave you just as it has arrived unexpectedly. I know in English we tend to call a lady luck, right? Lady luck is with you or lady luck leaves you. In Chinese, the metaphor is more of a wind. So the wind that pushes you to a winning streak, or the wind that just disappeared. The winds also have directions, and these are the 4 directions: the east, south, west, and north. So you think about when you're at a table, and then you move that direction, right? That has to do with the Chinese order. That means it always starts in the east and it ends in the west. So that's the idea, right? So you start with the east and then you move to south and then continue on. So this is clockwise. That is again the order of the wind starting from the east. So if that you have any idea why it's that way, it's very much this is very similar to, let's say, Native American culture, where they always start from the east and then go west. Now we come to the story of how did it arrive to the United States. Now I know there's a lot of arguments now, especially in the last 3 months, about Mahjong, about is it Chinese Americans? Isn't it their game? And how come it's in America? Okay, yes, Chinese Americans have this game, and it came with immigrants to America, with Chinese immigrants. And Chinese immigrants, boy, we have the immigration pattern in the United States is not just since the railroads. There are records of Chinese people who even served in the Civil War. So it's much further back and much older. And there's no point of saying when it started. But yes, where Chinese people go, like New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, they bring Mahjong with them. Yes, it's true. But as a game that is licensed and is sold in the mainstream American world, where people play in outside of Chinese circles, that's what I'm talking about. How did this game, Mahjong with 2 G's, arrive to the United States? And this might be a story you heard of before. Have you heard of this man named Babcock? And he had so let's maybe I have to back up a little bit. But on the National Mahjong League, they actually have the spelling of Mahjong with 2 G's. Now, when Mr. Babcock decided to license this game, he added the extra G for copyright purposes. So Mahjong, Chinese games, well, Chinese, okay, this is where it can get a little bit controversial. Chinese tradition doesn't have copyright. So Chinese didn't have a exact spelling of Mahjong that was accepted in the United States. So Babcock made Mahjong into Mahjong with the 2 G's because he was licensing game and he had this factory in China, and he shipped materials to China to make the tiles and sell it here. Now, I read that you might have read different things, but at that time, Parker Brothers was just a huge game making company. Now it's smaller. I think now it's a subsidiary of Hasbro, but it was at that time a much bigger company. So it's a business venture. And if you look at, I can show you this piece. I don't know if you can see on my hand, but usually when I'm trying to show you is that the material Mahjong is made of. Many times people think that, oh, it must be ivory. Well, ivory sets are very expensive. And even though ivory has been used in China for many, many, many artwork for, well, I could say easily 1,000 years, it's not everyone who can afford an ivory set. So so this white part that now we often see as plastic, it used to be bone. And what bone you're thinking? You're thinking what kind of bones? We're thinking about like pig bones or cow bones, and making a set with bones was really, really practical. And there are records of Middle Eastern games as well. Like, do you know that the dice? Why is the dice white? Because that came from goat bone. Okay, traditionally, and there's still games now in Mongolia that's played with. It's like jacks, but instead of the little star things that look like flowers, they play them with the vertebrae bones of small animals. So bones been used in games for definitely for 1,000 years, but then how can we, who has the material to do that? So what Babcock did was that he sent the bones to China to make this game. And then you see that there's usually another color on the back of your plastic mahjong piece. Well, that color, which in my example is a bamboo, it started out with bamboo, and then now it could be green, could be red, could be any color, and that color was used originally to make the piece opaque, so you can't cheat. So this is a combination of how these pieces are really made. Oh yes, and then so some people ask, so where did Babcock came up with this game, right? Well, Babcock was we know enough that he was a businessman, and that time in the 1920s when he brought the game over, even in the late 19th century to World War One, even that time, Shanghai was a huge international city with many territorial sections of British colonial government or French, Russian, German. So Shanghai was an international city of import exports, but it's definitely like a very crazy party decadent city where all sorts of games are played. Casinos, just think of that kind of environment where Mahjong was played, and it's very likely to understand, to imagine, just very, very easy to imagine that that's how this game Mahjong came to the world outside of China. So in the American version, you have jokers, and Chinese games don't have jokers. And then you also have these cards licensed again annually by the National League, Mahjong League. I find these elements are very, very good addition to the Mahjong game, because when I learned as a child, we certainly don't have cards, and the availability of jokers, you can't imagine now playing a game and winning a hand without jokers. But the jokers definitely bring in a flexibility to the game that the one I learned as a child did not have. And then we come to the who played it part. Now, who played it before? Well, there's some historical records that Zheng He, who was a seafaring general, that he on his boat, in the diaries, in the journals, that in passing there was some record of him playing mahjong it wasn't like, oh, this was the first time we played Mahjong, but more like while they were playing Mahjong, something happened. You see, so that's also why some people would estimate this game at a certain era, because Zheng He, at least we know this general, he has a life and he historically existed, and we think when that occurred. So it was said that he was with he was with his concubine, and he has a second in command general, and with his consort. So there were 4 people playing this game, and those 4 there were already women. So maybe we were at the first tables. Now this Mahjong game, I like to say another little context of what Mahjong is that in all ancient games, if you think about chess, the Western chess, Go, which is the black and white pebbles, or in Chinese now is called Weiqi. Go is the Japanese name for this game that they imported from China. And then to the right corner, that's Chinese chess. And the bottom corner is Western chess, and then you have Mahjong. So if you think about it, ancient games were for the leisurely class. If you have to work with your hands, you don't have time to play Mahjong. You don't have time to play chess. So it's definitely reserved for those who have the free time and the clean hands to sit around and play. So if you think about in that context, it's very, who gets to play? No wonder it's always some lordship or some general or somebody in high places, right? But as time goes by, we can say for sure that with all these desk jobs, right? There's far fewer people who are working out in the weather now, who's out, digging trenches and so forth. So there will be a greater audience for board games and table games. And now Mahjong is definitely a game that's not just for the leisurely class or the higher social classes, but it's a game for everyone. So these are the 4 players that I mentioned before, that perhaps the first game that was recorded, there were 2 women enjoying the game. And now some people will say, well, okay, what does that mean? Oh, for women to be at a table? Well, Mahjong is, relatively speaking, compared to the games I showed you earlier, these chess and the Go. Well, just in Chinese chess, you have to read more characters. You see that on the right corner? Okay, but then the Go, that game with just black and white pebbles, that is a strategic game that often they play it to train soldiers, to train you to become a military advisor. Not interesting to women. So and then you have Mahjong, where you have flowers and numbers. Well, this is definitely a more accessible game for women. Where even my grandmother's generation, there were not as many women who could read in Chinese. So this game definitely has a very popular following from women in Chinese society. So the sound of Mahjong tiles, to me, it means festivities. And I have a picture of how people gather for a banquet, and then many times while you're waiting in Chinese time, which means that many guests could be an hour or so late, and then that means the front of the banquet, they will have Mahjong tables set out. And people would just rotate, play a hand, get up, and then somebody else would play. So this is a great place to socialize. And then here are the Mahjong swims. I like to bring back the Mahjong swim of the past and the Mahjong swim of more modern days. And Mahjong truly is an international game. I'm showing you here just a few examples of competitions in Philippines, in Macau, in Malaysia, and in Taiwan. And in these different places you play Mahjong, Sometimes it's a 16-piece win, sometimes it's a 13-piece win. And sometimes they are like the jokers, instead of jokers, they would have other motifs to add into their sets. And then here, Mahjong is played all over China. Now, I don't know if you know this. So, Chairman Mao has a role, Mao Zedong, that you might have heard of his name. And this on the left, of course, is not a historical picture. This is a picture from a TV show that they portrayed him. But the point is that during Cultural Revolution, or many of Chinese arts were completely forbidden, and people were put in prison for the most ridiculous things. Something like, if you bow to your grandfather, you go to jail. If you are an actor on Chinese opera, you go to jail. I mean, just ridiculous restraint or destruction of Chinese culture. But Mahjong was preserved. I mean, here you have a time where you can't keep your grandmother's maybe your grandmother's bracelet, okay? But yes, you can play mahjong. So why the oddity, or why is that? Well, they think, well, we all can only guess that they say that Mao himself enjoyed mahjong very much, and so as long as he enjoyed it, everyone else were allowed to keep it. So of all those things that were forbidden, Mahjong was preserved, and thank Chairman Mao for that. And now Mahjong has been integrated into all social classes. So I like to show you that, see these ladies down on the left, they are in a makeshift table, and you'll see that people of all sorts of social classes play Mahjong now. This on the right is in a park I've seen in LA where I visit my mother. I've driven by senior centers where you constantly hear mahjong pieces, but also outside in the park, even in parking lots, there are seniors were near their assisted living areas. They would be playing mahjong. So they were playing mahjong at tea houses and just everywhere. And the difference, there are some differences in rules, and so you see this table on the right. This is a Chinese American group, so that's why they have a Christmas tree, and they're just playing mahjong at any occasion, any festive occasion. And so here I show you the Singapore Malaysian version. They don't have the flowers. They have variations of flowers, and then the Vietnamese version, they have their own variations, and the right side is a game show that you win things, mahjong related as well, thematically mahjong. And then you see, yes, you do see seniors, but it's definitely not a senior game. And you see the right side is just restaurants that are prepared for mahjong games and mahjong snacks. And this picture is actually a European competition, and I know that right now currently they're all been suspended, but in Middle East and Europe there are mahjong tournaments. So I leave you with having your little puppy dogs play their own set while you enjoy a good time with your friends.